The COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound impact on education across the world, from the shift that we saw from face-to-face to e-learning models and the impact that it had on students' mental health. Yet we are so inspired by how students, teachers, education leaders across the world have responded to the pandemic, and we want to share these stories. My name is Imani Dlamini, and you're listening to the Evolving New Now in Learning series podcast in collaboration with the Arizona State University ShapingEDU team. On this episode, I will be speaking to Tom Hames. I'm really excited to speak to you, Tom. Before we get started in the conversation, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself, your professional background, and basically what you do?
I have been teaching at a community college, which in the United States is a 2-year institution, on and off for 20 years now, plus. But I've also been I was also the technology director for that college for a while. I have done a number of different things having to do with technology and learning spaces and whatnot. But in the capacity that we're talking about today, I was an adjunct instructor at this community college when the pandemic struck.
That's really incredible. And just looking at your experience, you've really been working for many years in this space. Take us back to March 2020, just as the pandemic started and globally we started, implementing these lockdowns. How did that impact you as an educator? What kind of changes did you see?
So the challenge for me in March was maintaining that connection with my students when I went online. Now, we didn't have synchronous online like we're doing right now as an option back in before March 2020. But the key thing here is maintaining that connection and conversation with your students.
Tom, so you spoke about how you were using technologies in your class and you were kind of, you had all these challenges. What specific technologies and learning management systems were adopted by your school?
Built a space within Canvas that I call the Learning Commons. And the attempt there was to try to create an informal learning space, like, a place in the hallway with couches where people can sit around and talk about stuff. I don't know how much my students used it, but I very much encouraged them. I said, look, I don't care how you talk to each other, but talk to each other. Use chat, use WeChat, use whatever you've got at hand. I don't really care, and you can communicate with me in a bunch of different ways too. You can leave me messages in Canvas and it shoots me an email. You can send me an email. Other things I've done in a digital environment, I've become very enamored, especially in the last year or so, with using Miro, which is a concept mapping software in my classes. I use that in a lot of different ways. It's nice because, I can basically let my students loose in in a canvas and then share the screen, and everybody can see what everybody else is doing. And it makes for a nice sandbox.
In terms of when we're looking at maybe not online learning, but digital learning and access to tools and technologies, you touched on earlier that, you had some students have to hotspot each other, or there are certain home circumstances where they might not have access to the tools that they need. So in your experience, how did those students that were not as advantaged cope with the changes or the acceleration, I guess, of changes now that they have to?
One of the reasons that I went with Zoom early on as opposed to the other platforms, besides the pedagogical aspect of it, is the fact that with Zoom, you can access it a bunch of different ways. You can call in, you can use a smartphone, but you can also do it the old-fashioned way and just listen. And you miss part of the experience when you're doing that. And as I've tried to get more active with stuff, that becomes a little more of a problem. And again, it's become less of a problem because more people have bought something. They have something now. They at least have a Chromebook. And the campuses are open as well now. So I can say to my students, look, at the end of the day, if you need to go to a campus, there's plenty of resources there. There's Wi-Fi, there are actual computers. You can sit down and do the class there. And I say, these are the things you're going to want to have a computer for. And these are the things that you may not need a computer for, or these are the things that work better on a smartphone and so on and so forth. So you have to think about that accessibility of technology from a get-go.
Just to follow up on your previous point where you made the distinction between online learning and digital learning, what do you think the pandemic has helped us understand in terms of the difference between, online learning and digital learning?
Digital, by its very definition, is modular. If you go back and read Claude Shannon, 1948, Mathematical Theory of Communication, he's the first one to conceptualize bits and bytes. This idea, if you can break everything down into zeros and ones, you can reassemble anything into any form you like. So when I think of online learning, I think of grafting a digital environment onto the old paradigm. When I think of digital learning, it's taking the whole thing and saying, okay, we can reinvent everything because we have these tools now that allow us to do that.
So what you've just described, would that be your dream scenario? Like if you had to just sum that, your dream scenario in terms of how we approach digital learning environments?
So as I said earlier, the dream scenario for a digital learning environment is a hybrid campus that's designed around digitally exploding the needs of the students so that it meets their needs rather than them having to meet its needs.
What are the identifiable symptoms that your students are dealing with mental health challenges that you as an educator can observe? Like how can you actually tell that students are struggling?
That being human and being as empathetic as you can given the circumstances is important. And I try to build a lot of flexibility into my course. And there are no high stakes assignments in my class. I do the best I can to try to build systems that allow for students to struggle, because I'm not, even in smaller classes, I may not see it.
Thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed speaking with you and learned so much as well. Especially, I think the one that will stick out to me is that distinction between digital and online learning.